I cannot get the bangs on this wig to work properly. I want this wig to work so bad. Okay, I really like it. Hi friends, so today I'm going to be going over how I made the arm and the hand parts, gloves, words. I really like how the bracers turn out. I think they look really cool with the little purple flyaway bits. I really like that. And again, this is just the build part. I will be painting in the very last video since the painting was the whole thing. All of the foam that I will be using is the TheFoamory foam, which they sent to me for this build, and I am obsessed with their foam. You're probably tired of me talking about them, but they're my all-time favorite foam brand. I've been using them for years and I really trust them. So anyway, thank you again to the TheFoamory for sending me this foam so that I can build this, and yeah, let's just go ahead and hop into how I built it. So I'll start with this upper arm piece here. I made the pattern and I put it on a 6mm foam. For the bone piece, I made this toenail looking pattern, which I'll use to cut 4 pieces of 6mm foam, 2 for each side. And then I bevel one edge and I glue them together, and wow, look at that seamless transition. Anyway, now I have this thing. I use my 240 grit sanding drum to sand down the seam and also add the fun little details onto the bone. Then I mark out where the bone piece is gonna sit, and then I glue it on with barge, and as you can tell, I also added some details onto that flat piece that sits against my arm. I added some holes on both sides, and I 3D printed some reinforcement washers and I threaded rope through them to attach. They're also velcroed onto the sleeve that I'll be making later in the video. For the elbow piece, I made this like shark tooth looking pattern thing, and I cut out 8 of them, 4 for each side. And I beveled each side so that when they come together it forms a point, and then I just glued them all together with barge. And then this is the piece that it sits on, which I'm clearly not struggling trying to figure out how exactly it's supposed to go. Once I glue it on, I hit the edges with my sanding drum and I make some little details. And then those are the little washers that I printed out. They just keep the foam from ripping, and I do hot glue them on. Brace yourself for the bracers. That was the coolest thing I think I've ever said. First I made the sleeve, so I wrapped my whole arm in cling wrap and duct tape, and then I drew on the pattern. It's like a half sleeve thing, half as in the whole length of my arm, but only like the outer half of my arm. And next I struggled to remove the plastic for like 10 minutes. This was actually really embarrassing to watch. I don't know why I didn't just cut it off. Anyway, I take my mock-up that I made with a similar fabric and I placed it onto my black pleather fabric, and then I pin it on, make any adjustments I felt like I needed to make it more comfortable from my arm, and then I cut it out. Now I take that netting that I dyed in my previous video. I dyed it with RIT Dye's Race Car Red, and I placed my sleeve over that. And then I cut out the netting in my sleeve pattern shape. After that, I pin the netting to the sleeve. Sew it. And I trim off the excess. And I begin the very exciting process of cutting every other square to make the netting bigger. Again, I could not find the right size netting, so while this did kind of suck, that is the coolest looking netting I have ever seen. It looks really cool. I just have this bias tape. I ended up buying some for the rest of the armor. I was making it out of some linen fabric and it worked. But then I was like, you know what would save me a lot of time? Just buying some. So I did, and I just got white because I know that I would not be able to color match this to literally anything. So I'm just currently shaking up some color in my very dirty airbrush bottle. It looks pretty good. I'm gonna make it a little bit darker, and then I'm gonna go airbrush the bias tape that I measured out for this. Once I airbrush and I let it dry, I pin it onto the sleeves. Here you can see a before and after of cutting the netting. Doesn't that look so cool? Oh, I'm still so thrilled. That's probably my favorite part of the costume. I'm thrilled with that. Then I just sew it down and I sew the forearm sides together. Then I turn it right side out and I try it on. To keep the upper sleeve part in place, I sew on this black elastic band and then I also Velcro it to the top of the bodysuit. For the bracers, I did another duct tape pattern, but this time just for my forearm since the brace, it doesn't wrap all the way around. And then I also have that dart in the middle to make it curve and to help give it shape once it's glued together. I made this pattern of the purple flyaway pieces, printed them out, and then I cut them out. Then I made a pattern of the large bone pieces that sit on top of the bracer. I made those out of 10mm foam. The flyaway pieces are 2mm foam. Once everything is cut out, I sand them with my sanding drum. And then after everything's sanded, I blast them with heat to close up the pores and melt any fuzzies. Overheating 2mm foam gives it this nice crispy warped look, which I was going for, but be careful not to heat it too much because it can start to burn. Since I sanded the base of these white pieces at an angle, they flare out on the bracer instead of sticking straight out. So once I test the fit, I glue them on with barge. I guess I didn't film this process, but in the previous video I made basically the same exact spikes. They're just made out of 4mm and 6mm foam, and I glued them to the protruding spikes that I made. The lace holes also got some 3D printed washers to protect the foam, and I laced the purple rope through for a test fit. For the handpiece, I made a pattern and I printed it out. Those got put onto 4mm foam, and I put 2mm details on top of the foam for a little extra spice. Then I just sanded everything together. The piece they sit on is roughly the same size as the top of my hand. It's just a strip of 4mm foam. They just get glued to the top. The middle piece is longer than the rest of them, so it's really slight though. You won't be able to tell unless you're staring at it. So I had to make sure I was putting the right piece in the middle. So I made these gloves out of stretch fabric. All you do is you trace your hand and you'll add allowance. You want to make sure you do this with a 4-way stretch fabric or else you will not have a good time. Same with the sleeves, I added the netting and the trim, and then I cut the net to make the bigger squares. Next I heat formed the claw to the top of my hand and I just hot glued it onto the glove. I 3D modeled and printed these little finger spikes. I used Blender to model, and they're just planes. They're just angled taco things. I don't know. And then I heated them up one at a time, and then I wrapped each one around my fingers to form fit them. Then I glued each piece to a piece of paper to keep them from flying away when I plasti dip them. Tape works better, but I didn't have any spare tape at the time, so I just glued them down. Then everything got 2 coats of plasti dip. Once primed, I glued the fingers onto my glove with hot glue, and that's really it for the build part. Again, the painting will be in the very last video, so that's it. That's the build for all the arms, for all of my arms, all 1,500 of them. Thanks again for hanging out and joining me while I build this. I hope it was informative, entertaining perhaps. I will see you guys next week with the next part of this build, and I hope you have a super awesome rest of the day, and I will see you guys later. Bye.